Part 2. Well, goodbye for now. Good luck, chaps. Oh, Lord, I forgot. Password Emil. Password Emil, Mittler repeated, and went back to the courtyard to report. It was now 8 o'clock, and the professor went out to inspect the guard. We're not likely to get hold of him tonight, dash it, said Gustav restlessly. Well, it wouldn't be a bad thing for us if he went straight to bed, Emil pointed out. If he goes out again and starts taking taxis and going to restaurants or nightclubs or a theatre, we shouldn't have enough money to follow him. The professor came back and sent the Mittlers out to the square to act as liaison men. We've got to think how to keep tabs on that fellow, he said. Think hard now, will you? They all sat still for a time, thinking deeply, until they were interrupted by the sound of a bicycle bell, and a very new and shiny bike came flashing into the courtyard with Pony riding it and Brett behind her on the step. They both shouted, 3 cheers, as they saw the others. Emil jumped to his feet and ran to help them off, recognising Pony, and they shook hands gaily. This is my cousin Pony Hutchen, or rather Heimbold, he said. The professor politely gave up his chair, and she sat down, but turned on Emil immediately. You are a wretch, she cried. You come to Berlin, and before you even get off the train, you run smack into the middle of a thriller. We were just going off to the station again to meet the next train from Neustadt when your friend Brett turned up with your note. He's all right, by the way. I like him. Brett blushed and stuck his chest out. Mum and Dad and Grandma are all sitting at home wondering what on earth you can be up to. Brett wouldn't tell me anything in front of them, of course, so I just said I'd see him downstairs. Then I slipped out of the house with him and came along, but I must dash back at once or they'll be sending for the police. Their nerves won't stand losing 2 of us in one day. Brett held up 2 pennies. Pony's bike saved us the return fare, he said proudly, and the professor put the money back in his pocket. Are they furious? Emil asked Pony. Not a bit, she replied. Grandma got a bit wild and kept on saying, I expect he's just gone to call on the president, till Mum and Dad seemed to think it was quite possible. I hope you'll catch your man tomorrow, though. Who is your Sherlock Holmes? Sherlock Holmes is a famous fictional detective. Fictional meaning in stories. The professor, said Emil. Here he is. Nice to meet you, laughed Pony. I've always wanted to know a real detective. The professor laughed too because he was embarrassed and mumbled something quite unintelligible. Before I go, I'd better give you my pocket money, said Pony. Here it is, 8p. Buy yourself a cigar or 2 with it, boys. Emil took the money, but Pony remained on the only chair like a beauty queen surrounded by the selection committee. I really must go, she said at last, but I'll be back in the morning. Where are you all going to sleep? Oh, I wish I could stay. I'd make you some coffee, but I can't, of course. Nice girls like me have to be in bed in good time. Well, goodbye, everybody. Good night, Emil. She put a friendly hand on her cousin's shoulder, jumped on her bike, and rode away, ringing her bell like mad. The boys were quite speechless for a few minutes after she'd gone. Then the professor murmured, well, 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 as his father might have done, and the others thought he was quite right. Okay, chapter 11. A spy in the hotel. Time seemed to pass very slowly. Emil went out to see the 3 guards, hoping they would let him replace one of them. But Crumb and the 2 Mittlers said they would rather stay where they were. Then he cautiously put his nose round the hotel entrance in case there was anything to see there, and came back to the courtyard quite excited. Tell you what, he said, we ought to have a spy inside the hotel all night. I know Crumb is watching from the street corner, but he's only got to turn his head away for a moment, and Grundice could slip out and disappear without our knowing anything about it. Oh, that's all very well, Gustav replied, but you can't simply go up to the porter and say you're going to sit on the stairs all night, and if you did get in, supposing old Bowler Hat looked out and recognised you. All our work would be wasted. No, you mustn't show your face inside, whatever happens. That's not what I meant, said Emil. Well, what did you mean? Asked the professor. Well, there's sure to be an odd job boy in the hotel, like working the lift and all that. I thought one of us might get hold of him and tell him what's going on. He'll know the place like the back of his hand and can tell us how to keep an eye on that room all night. Oh, yeah, good. Yeah, very good, in fact, said the professor. He had a habit of speaking like a schoolmaster, and that had earned him his nickname. Good for you, Emil, said Gustav. Anyone would think you were Berlin born. If you get any more brilliant ideas like that, we'll have to give you the freedom of the city. Berliners aren't the only people with brains, said Emil, not liking to hear Neustadt slighted, and he added, We still haven't had that boxing match, by the way. What? What's that? Asked the professor. Gustav insulted my best suit, Emil replied. Well, you'd better fight it out tomorrow, the professor decided. Tomorrow or not at all. Oh, your suit's all right, Gustav said carelessly. I've got quite used to it now. I'll fight any time you like, of course, but I warn you, I'm champion in my part of town, so you'd better look out. Well, I'm champion at my school, said Emil. Oh, shut up, both of you, said the professor. You and your fists. What I'm concerned about is getting into the hotel, but I suppose I can't leave you two alone, or you'll start hammering each other. Let me go then, said Gustav. All right, said the professor. Go and talk to the lift boy, but watch your step. See what you can do. You ought at least to find out which room the fellow's in. Come back and report in an hour's time. Gustav left them, and Emil and Professor went out and stood in the street by the archway, talking about their schools and the masters. The professor pointed out different makes of cars they went by and told Emil how to recognise them. Then they had a sandwich. It was getting dark and the illuminated signs began to flash on and off. Trains thundered by on the overhead railway. Other trains rumbled beneath them on the underground. The noise in the street of all the passing trams, buses, cars and motorbikes sounded to Emil like some crazy orchestra playing wildly. From a nearby cafe came the strains of dance music, and people were crowding into the cinemas round the square for the last performances. To Emil it was all strange and tremendously exciting. He almost forgot how he came to be there, and about the £7 which had been stolen. It's funny to see a big tree like that growing over there by the station, he remarked. It looks as though it's got there by mistake. Berlin's wonderful, of course, but I don't know that I should like to live here always. Neustadt is small. We've got 2 markets, and the station square, and the playground by the river, and the Amsel Park, and that's all. But it's enough for me. Here it's as noisy as though there were a fair going on all the time, and so many streets and squares. I should always be losing my way. I don't know what would have happened to me tonight if I hadn't found you chaps. It gives me the creeps just to think of standing here all alone. Why, you get used to it, said the professor, and I probably shouldn't be able to stick a small place like Neustadt, with its 2 markets and a playground. Well, you get used to that too, Emil replied. Is your mother very strict? The professor asked next. My mother? No, not a bit. She lets me do more or less anything as I like, but then I mostly don't want to, if you see what I mean. I can't say I do, said the professor. Well, it's like this, Emil explained. Are your people well off? I don't really know. No one ever talks about money at home. Well, then I expect you have plenty, Emil observed wisely. The professor thought for a moment and then said, I dare say you're right. My mother and I talk about money because we've got so little. She has to earn it and works jolly hard, but even so there's never really enough. Yet when there's anything on like a school outing, she always manages to give me as much as the other boys have to spend, and sometimes more. How can she do that? Asked the professor. I don't know, but she does. Of course, I always try to bring some back. She expects you to, does she? No, nothing of the kind, but I like to. Oh, I see, said the professor. That's the way things work out in your home. Emil nodded. Yes, just about. Sometimes I go out in the evenings with Proch, who lives on the floor above us, or with some of the other boys, and Mum says I needn't be home till 9. Then I usually get back a bit earlier, perhaps by 7, so that she doesn't have to have supper alone. She says I should stay out with my pals, and I do sometimes, but it isn't much fun when I know she's all by herself, and she's always really pleased to see me back, whatever she may say about it. It's not a bit like that in my home, said the professor. If by any chance I get home early, I'm sure to find everyone's gone out to dinner or the theatre or something. We're quite fond of each other, of course, but we all go our separate ways. Our own ways, sorry. Well, it doesn't cost anything to be together, Emil said, but don't you go thinking I'm a mummy's boy or anything like that. I'd bash anyone who said so. See what I mean? Yes, I do, said the professor. They stood under the archway in silence for a while. Night came down. The stars were clear and glittering, and the moon seemed to be watching the overhead railway out of one eye. The professor cleared his throat, then said, without looking at Emil, I expect you and your mother are very fond of each other. Yes, we are, Emil replied simply. He's got a lovely relationship with his mum, hasn't he, Emil? He's a good son, and she's a good mum. Right. Okay, end of part 2. I'll see you tomorrow. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye. See you Monday, rather.